All right, it's time for the Zoe Bowl Playoff Preview, brought to you by me as always. I do not have a guest for this last one. I know we didn't do a whole lot of guests this season, so hopefully we can do some more next. But yeah, let's jump right into it. Here's the playoff bracket as it stands. Number 1 seed, my brother Brandon.
Ray, don't!
Number 2 seed, Caleb. Not too surprising, they both had a really hot start. I think the one team that was mentioned with the two of them was Josh's, which lost 6 straight. So that, I think, was the big shocker to miss the playoffs. Everyone else here, I think, at the midway point when we looked at the teams. So I want to look at the first matchup, Matt versus Jason. So with Matt's team feeling dangerous, I think he has some good matchups here. Baker Mayfield and Callaway connection versus Carolina. I actually like Zay Jones versus the Jets. I didn't think I'd be talking him in a playoff match, but here we are. Saquon Barkley versus anyone, really. He's just going to get the usage. And I really like Aaron Jones versus Atlanta. I expect Green Bay to have a pretty good game, and I think they're going to run it a lot. So we'll see what happens. Maybe he'll change that Saints defense, or maybe he's going to roll with it. I'm not sure. But I will have to give credit where credit due. Jason's team is full of great backup running backs. I know Connor's not playing this week, but Spencer Ware, Nick Chubb, Kevin Coleman. So I have to give props to Jason. I think this is the best running back core, pretty much made out of free agency or like very, very late picks, RB0 strategy. So very, very impressed by how well he was able to manage his team this year. But I do think Matt Erdman wins this one. All right, and the other big matchup is Vince versus Thomas. Thomas has a juggernaut of a team. So, I mean, Tom Brady versus Miami, Christian McCaffrey and Todd Gurley are both very solid running backs. I think he really does have two big difference-making running backs, which looking at the playoff landscape is pretty rare. So I think Thomas actually has a very strong team. However, I am going to give this to Touchdown Breezes. I think that Vince has a worse team, but he has some really good matchups. And he's starting 2 New Orleans players versus Tampa Bay. I think that'll be a big game for him. I actually like Robert Woods at Chicago. Kelsey's been a monster all year. They're actually starting to use Kenyon Drake. So I actually do like Vince for the upset. Even though I will say on most Sundays, I think Thomas's team would win. I think Vince has it this week. So looking at the final 4 teams here, Brandon versus Matt and Vince versus Caleb, if you're going off my projections, which honestly have been fairly garbage all year. So hope you're not offended if I don't have you in here. And then from these, looking at the matchups, I kind of just try to put their teams side by side to see what the matchup would look like. And I actually have Brandon beating Matt and Vince, again, some really good matchups beating Caleb for the final match being Brandon versus Vince. So my predicted Zoe Bowl matchup then would be Vince versus Brandon. Looking through the matchups here, who they're playing, it was hard to post every single one who each person was playing, but how I looked at it is, again, I think Vince is kind of the Cinderella story this year in the draft. We've seen it before where the new person comes in and just slips into the playoffs and makes it all the way. That was Mike a couple of years ago, and I think it's Vince this year. So I think he has some really favorable matchups, even though his team, although it's built not as maybe you'd expect it to be a championship team. I know kind of Drake and Howard were a little bit of a letdown for me. I had to wait a long time for Ingram. But it seems to be getting hot at the right time. Vince fought his way into the playoffs, and historically in our league, the team with the best record doesn't win. So I have Vince as our Zoe Bowl champion. That's my prediction. Sorry, Vince, if I just cursed you. But let's get to the real fight here. Who wins Sacco? Also, I kind of briefly wanted to cover how it works. If you get a win, you move up above anyone that lost. So myself being at the bottom here, if I won, I would have to go up at least 3 spots. And I know this is very confusing for people to say that if you lose, anyone that won goes above you. So you're moving at least 3 spots down. So it's very confusing. I know in the past, people who were 2-1 in the playoffs, and then they lose that last game and they're somehow Sacco. There's a lot of confusion. It's taken me a while to even wrap my head around it. But for whatever reason, this is how ESPN does it. Maybe next year we can try to switch it to a bracket. I'm not even sure if that's possible. So a lot of different variables in that. That's extremely hard to predict. I'm just hoping it's not me. The next thing I kind of want to talk about is team management, because I know me personally gets frustrated when I have a terrible team. This year I was 4-9, so I think by all accounts a terrible team. And it's easy for me to say, well, Freeman was out, or Michelle had injury issues, or Sanders been a little banged up and now he's on IR, or whatever I want to try to blame. But I do think team management does come into it quite a bit. I mean, you look at Caleb's team, who never even got to use Bell, and he's still the second seed. So I just want to go over, these are just like 6 games here. 13 points if I'd put in Fuller over Davis. That's week 2. Week 3, if I had gone with Jay Allen over Michelle or Robinson, that's a 10-point swing. I win that game. Week 4, if I put Corey Davis over Robinson, and these aren't just like, I could have switched a lot of people to win. This is just like one minor call that I made that escalated into me losing that week. Week 7, 8, and 13 here. And I put in just Mac over Michelle, who was injured, but I wanted to go with Michelle anyway. It's a 28-point swing. Had I done more than that, if I'd done like 2 people, if I'd done Mack and Njoku over Lewis and Ingram, that's a 50-point swing. But, I'm just doing one player here. Winston over Wilson, Corey Davis over Mack. So you start to see, this is just 6 games. There are some where I just lost straight out, and there was nothing I could do about it. But there's a lot of games. This is just 6 that I took. If you do that, now my record's 10-3 instead of 4-9. Now I'm 4th points for, and I'm sitting pretty good in the playoff right now. But those 6 little changes have a huge effect on the season. So I think fantasy a lot of times does come down to taking a gutsy call, or might be a crazy call, and it just pays off for you. And that's what I try to focus on when I'm having these terrible seasons. I did want to mention what is a big travesty is Jason Cole is 4th most points scored, but he has a 6-7 record. So that's kind of tough. I think he had a similar situation last year, so feel kind of bad for him. I'll say as a final thoughts for me here, I don't think Jason wins. I know I said it's hard to predict, and I've been bad at predicting all year. There's no way Jason wins the Zoe Bowl this year. There's no way he wins it before me. And if he does win it all this year, I'm willing to just throw this out here. I will take the Sacco punishment on, regardless of where I finish in the standings, if Jason Brondo somehow wins the Zoe Bowl this year. So take that as inspiration, or however you want. But just throwing my cards out there. Wish everyone the best of luck. And I'll see you next year, I guess.